Hi, I'm Ted Haftegabber, founder and producer of Live Talks Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us. Since we started over a decade ago, we have brought you hundreds of conversations with storytellers, writers, actors, musicians, humorists, chefs, and thought leaders in business and science. You can watch and hear most of these in our YouTube channel and our podcast. For details, visit livetalksla.org. And now, here's the show you've tuned in to see.
Wow, I just had such an amazing treat. I got to talk to Temple for about 10 minutes. You are in for an extraordinary journey. I learned so much in just 10 minutes. I wanted to start, it's interesting because I had this interview all prepared and she messed me all up because I actually talked to her for 10 minutes and realized that I had a lot more to learn. I read the book, but I didn't read it well enough. Anyway, I wanted to start because one of the things that fascinated me most about you was your fascination with animals. And I really wanted to talk to you about, as we talked about the pictures, what pictures, Temple, come to mind when you think about animals?
Well, I'm seeing cattle that worked with in Arizona. I'm like a total object visualizer. Everything I think about is a picture. And my interest in animals started in high school. Because I had horses when I was in high school, and then when I went and visited my aunt's ranch in Arizona, that's where the cattle got introduced. So that brings up the really important thing of exposure. But being a visual thinker, the very first work I did back in the 70s, before I even knew that verbal thinking existed, was to look at what cattle were seeing. And something like a shadow, you can see a reflection on this water bottle, something like that. A piece of string hanging down would make them stop. Nobody else had looked at that before. And I couldn't figure out why other people thought it was kind of weird. I guess if you think in words, you tend to not look at what cattle were looking at.
Well, I think in the words, so I definitely wasn't thinking about the cattle, what they were looking at. I don't even know how much cattle I actually saw, Temple, to be honest.
Well, the thing is that I do a lot of talks for corporations, and the first thing I tell them, you have to understand different kinds of thinking exist, and different people are mixtures of different kinds of thinking, and I'm an object visualizer. So everything I think about is a picture. And the kind of things that my kind of mind is good at is art, animals, photography, and mechanics. Art and mechanics go together. Then you've got the visual spatial pattern mathematical thinker, programmer, higher mathematics, music, and then of course you've got verbal word thinkers.
Well, it's interesting, Temple, because one of the things when you talk about the cattle is, and it's interesting that you started to recognize that there is a kind of visual thinking going on. And there's a part in your book where you actually seem to imply that we are born with our brains are differently wired when we're born, and there are these visual and different types of thinkers, but we don't really acknowledge that.
Well, kids are more visual thinking, because I have a slide where the caption says non-slip flooring, and it's got a picture of a steer looking at a sunbeam. Now I show that to school administrators, and I say, well, how many people noticed steer was looking at sunbeam? School administrators, no hands go up. I show that same exact slide like to third grade students, over half the hands go up. They see it, the animal was staring at the sunbeam.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things you talk about is because language seems to have become the dominant way that we sort of think that we understand things, but that there were other ways that we understood things, visual ways, spatial ways, that actually in some ways predate the language piece.
Well, the other thing I'm very concerned about is skill loss. In 2019, right before COVID shut everything down, I went to 2 state-of-the-art brand new pork processing plants, brand new poultry processing plant, and all the equipment came from Holland. And the reason for that is we took skilled trades out of the schools 20 years ago, and we're paying for it. Another big mistake that many industries made was taking out in-house engineering and contracting work out. Yeah, that made money in the short run, but now, 20, 25 years later, it's come back to bite us. Because all the people I've worked with that designed and built systems for me, they're all retired. They're not getting replaced because those kids that should have been taking those shop classes are playing video games in the basement with an autism diagnosis. Because a good 20% of
You
the
hear
people,
that, parents?
20% of the people I worked with were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD, and they owned metalworking shops, patenting equipment, and selling it around the world.
Well, one of the things that you told me, Temple, that I found so interesting is basically, and I know this from being in so many schools, that schools are they really most reward verbal and mathematical thinking.
That's right.
But what you're telling me is that basically there's a whole other kind of thinking that we are not rewarding, that we're not developing, and because of it, we're at risk of losing something very
We're
valuable.
losing skills. Another thing we don't make when I started researching the visual thinking book is the state-of-the-art electronic chip-making machine. And it came from Holland. And that goes back to they have their skilled trades. See, because that's the visual thinkers who can't do the math. I have people that build complicated equipment for me, can't do algebra. Own shops, tons of patents. You see, and that's a different type of intelligence than the verbal or the more pattern mathematical thinker. And we need all the different kinds of minds. And these kids are going nowhere. They're growing up today, they've never used tools. I'm seeing kids building elaborate things with Legos when they're 16 years old. Tools should have been introduced in 3rd grade. And a lot of the people that I worked with, a single welding class was their beginning. Growing up working on cars was their beginning. And the problem now is the shops are not forming. The small shops are not forming. I just talked to a farmer today, and he was complaining that he had to order parts from China for corn harvesting equipment. Well, the machine shops are gone that could have just made that part for him.
Well, it's interesting because with kids, in schools, in most schools, the kids, not New Roads, I will be clear about that, not New Roads. In most schools, there are these industrial models of schools where one size fits all, and they're trying to make one model, and the kids are sitting in desk all day. They are reading books, but from what you're saying to me, it is really that they need to be learning through doing and experiencing. And for you, it seems like doing and experience is what provides the pictures in your database.
Well, and that's right. You see, in the 50s, I mean, I was taking, of course, girls took sewing. I loved sewing, hated cooking, and I loved sewing. I had a toy sewing machine that actually sewed. I made costumes for the school play. The only difference between sewing and steelworking is the material's stiff. It's all the same skills. No, I'm serious. It's all the same skills.
You all knew that, right?
Yeah, and art. And if I hadn't had woodworking, art, and sewing, I would have absolutely despised school. You've got kids today that don't do any of these things. I had a girl in my class last year who had never used a ruler to measure anything. Anything. Never used a ruler.
Well, I remember my thing was, and I've seen that kids can't read the hands of watches anymore. That just is not a part of what they do. And I think that because the other thing I hear you're talking about is that with technology in this information age where we seem to emphasize one type of thinker and value one type of thinker, we're losing things that we don't understand we're losing.
That's the problem. We've got infrastructure falling apart. You see, you take something like the state-of-the-art electronic chip-making machine, there's a lot of skilled trades in that. I mean, people forget that when you order things online, you have this huge infrastructure. Now I'm seeing a gigantic warehouse that's under construction right now.
Well, it's interesting, Temple, because you had this extraordinary life. You were voted one of the most influential people by Time magazine. And to me, you started out with all of these challenges. And the thing that I'm really curious about is your mother. I'm curious about what she did.
She always pushed me. Growing up in the 50s was a benefit because they taught manners. I have grandfathers from the 50s and 60s discovering they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. Manners and life skills were taught in a much more systematic way. I had a great third grade teacher. I had a wonderful science teacher because I was a goof-off student who didn't care about studying. Algebra I couldn't do, but English and history, that was goofing off. And also there was a really good small contractor named Jim Uhl who's seen my drawings and seeked me out to design cattle handling facilities for him. You see, these people were really good mentors. I've got to really thank the teachers and the mentors that I had.
And it's interesting because one of the things that you said, is I'm different, not less. And the interesting thing to me is how did you come to believe that about yourself?
Well, I can remember designing some of the big jobs that were shown in the movie, those dipping vats. I remember drawing the drawings for one of those, and I looked at that drawing and I go, a stupid person couldn't have drawn that. One of my big motivations in the 70s, back when I was in my 20s, is I wanted to prove I wasn't stupid. And you see, the visual type of thinking is a different kind of thinking. And those kids are, those skills aren't being valued. They look upon skilled trades sort of as lesser kind of thinking. Now I'm talking high-end skilled trades. I'm not talking about roofing and laying down asphalt. I'm talking about people that are owning shops and vending equipment, laying out entire factories, and we're not replacing these people.
Well, it's interesting, Dimple, because you showed me, and everybody needs to look at the drawings. Her drawings are absolutely unbelievable. And you were telling me how these drawings evolve. It's from your actual experience.
Well, first thing I have to do is go out and look at a whole lot of stuff, because you have to load the database. How could I draw a good gate if I don't know what a gate looks like? So I went out and I worked cattle in lots of different places. Now, the first thing I had to learn is how to relate lines on a drawing to the structure. Like, for example, if you have a square on a floor plan, that may be a column that holds up the roof. And I remember going over to the Swift plant, and there was another person to help me. His name was Norby. He was superintendent of the Swift plant. And I kind of made my own self-made internship there. And they let me borrow a set of beautifully, very detailed hand-done drawings. Walked around that entire plant for 2 days. To every drawing, every line on that drawing can relate to the real thing. Then I worked for a while for a construction company, and they had a great draftsman named Davy. And then I copied the way he did his drawings. But I had to learn read drawings first. Then as I draw something now, I'll sketch out the layout, but then as I draw in the details, I see all the rods in the fence. I see all the welds. I build it in my mind as I draw it. You see, nothing's abstract in my thinking.
Well, and how do we educate in a school students who are visual thinkers?
Well, I dropped the algebra requirement and replaced business math. And
we got to talk to the University of California about that.
Well, the problem is, here in California, if the wind goes over 45 miles an hour, you got to turn the power off because you never maintain the brackets on the electric towers. You need us. That's the thing.
But what do you think, that parents and educators and schools can do to nurture these visual thinkers?
Well, I put all the hands-on classes back in. Okay, like for theater, there's making scenery. When I was in elementary school, I didn't care about being in the play. I wanted to make costumes and sets. That's the stuff that interested me. That was making things. I was doing that in elementary school. And taking out shop classes, worst thing we ever did. Because we're not, they used to kind of say, well, the stupid kids take shop. Well, let me tell you, some of the people I worked with were not stupid. And they were inventing complicated stuff. And when the patent office first started, they had to make models of things like grain harvesting equipment, clever mechanical equipment. That was the beginning of the patent office. Would have been my kind of thinking originally.
So making needs to come back into schools.
We need to be making.
And using your hands.
Making stuff. And I'm a big believer in exposing kids to lots of different stuff. I'm seeing a kid get an autism diagnosis, and he might be a brain in math, and the parents are both programmers, and they don't think to teach the kid programming. because they're too locked into the label. Another thing I'm seeing all the time with the math type of kids, which are not my kind of mind, they can just look at algebra and stuff and just see the answer. Don't force them to do it step by step. I'm seeing this pattern over and over again. Over and over and over again. And then you might have a third grader that needs the high school algebra book, the old-fashioned kind, with it's all numbers. I use that kind of book for doorstop, but there's another kind of kid where you give it to that other kind of kid and they're going to take off with it. I'm a big fan of exposure. You've got to expose kids to a whole lot of different stuff so you can see what they want to do and also find out what they hate, too. That's also important.
It's interesting because one of the model here for the education is in the middle school, there are 35 plus electives. And in the high school, there's 65 plus, because the idea is just that.
Yeah, okay,
It
good.
is to get them to try things out, and some things they're going to decide, I never want to do that again. And some things might spark a passion.
That's right. But the thing I'm seeing now on the drawings, when the industry switched from hand drafting to computer drafting, started getting strange mistakes on drawings. Because you had people doing drawings who had never built anything, never drawn by hand. I had a set of drawings 3 years ago where they didn't draw in the reinforcing steel. They said that's in the written specs, and I go, I marked in all the reinforcing steel. I said, you go back to that fancy engineering firm and you get them to do this drawing right. Or you're going to get a whole pile of concrete work at this plant and it's not going to have reinforcing steel in it.
Well, one of the things you're saying that I'm finding profound, Temple, is you're saying that we, at least as I'm hearing it, that we are disconnected from an accurate understanding of reality, and that basically these drawings reflect
See, we need to have all three kinds of minds, because what I noticed, I went back through all the jobs, and I've worked for every major meat company on equipment, and the degreed engineer, the mathematician, will do the boilers, the refrigeration, make sure the roof doesn't fall down, power and water requirements. My kind of thinker's out there making all the cleverly designed mechanical equipment. And I've seen that division of labor in every company I've worked with. And I can tell you, those chip-making machines have got plenty of that kind of stuff for my kind of mind.
And as a visual thinker, what was your experience like in school? Because we talked about, Temple, that we actually share a school, because you went to one of the schools where I was actually a high school director.
I got kicked out of that school because a girl called me a retard, and I heaved a very heavy book, social studies book, at her head. I used a book as a weapon. That's what I did.
It's interesting. Who were the mentors in school that really saw you?
Well, Mr. Carlock, my science teacher in high school. And he was a NASA space scientist. He wasn't an educator originally. And he gave me all kinds of interesting projects to do with optical illusions, and he wanted me to figure them out. And he showed me how studying was the pathway to a scientific career, because I had a big motivation issue. English and history, I just goofed off. I could do English and history just fine. and he got me motivated. I can't emphasize enough how important a teacher like Mr. Carlock was for me, and he was shown very nicely in the movie.
Well, it's interesting. I will since you mentioned the movie, one of our students before I came in, she is, you're a rock star to her, and she basically, they're studying you in psychology here at the school.
Oh, well, thank you.
And she said, I said, I could always ask you to ask Temple a question. She goes, no, I can't ask Temple a question. So I said, I'll ask the question. And she wanted to know how accurate that movie was.
The most accurate thing in the movie is it shows how I think visually. Like there's a scene in there where shoe is said, and all these different shoes came up. That is accurate. And all the projects I did were accurate, and my actual drawings got shown in the movie. And in the visual thinking book, there's decorative pages in there which are made from my drawings. I insisted that had to be in there.
And did you recognize the rest of your life in there?
The main people, like my mother and Ann at the ranch and Mr. Carlock, they were shown really nicely. And it kind of pretty accurately represented up through my 20s. And I love the fact it showed how I think. I think that's the most important part of that movie, and that's real accurate.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things you also wrote is you said, genius requires not only intelligence and creativity, but divergent thinking as well.
Well, my thinking is associative. We were talking backstage about philosophical concepts. And
Existentialism. We're going to have a conversation now?
Existentialism. I don't know. I get totally inappropriate pictures that I know are wrong. And some of this very abstract philosophy, it doesn't mean anything to me. Now, one other thing I've been very effective at is writing animal welfare guidelines.
Well, I think
because I write them really clear, like traffic rules.
Well, what if I say, I think, therefore I am?
I'm now seeing that statue of Rodin, the thinker. Well, I'm saying, that's what I'm saying.
The man thinking?
I'm saying that statue.
And so, what would our society look like, and how would it be different if we actually did value visual thinkers? What would
we need all the different kinds of thinkers, because in order to run a business, you're going to need verbal thinkers just for organization. We need all the different kinds of thinkers. But right now, we especially are screening out my kind of mind, and I'm finding that talking to people in factories, all different kinds of factories, not just the meat industry, they can't find anybody to fix equipment. That's really serious. We've got water systems falling apart. You see things like water systems, power plants. I find that stuff extremely interesting. And it's essential stuff.
So you're saying that the stuff that we need for life, some of the skills that we need for life, some of the skills that we need for innovation, we're losing.
We're losing skills. And then I went to the Steve Jobs Theater, structural glass walls from Italy and Germany. The state-of-the-art machine that they use for picking up chickens is from Italy, with parts from China that are very difficult to replace because we don't have local machine shops to make the parts.
Well, it's interesting, because there's this whole thing that happened during the pandemic of remote work. And
well, you're not going to fix a waterworks with remote work. I'm sure you of that.
So you don't think we could have an avatar go out there?
Oh, I don't think so. See, the kind of stuff that my kind of mind works on doesn't work remote.
Well, then what do you think of this virtual reality stuff then?
Well, the amount of power it takes to run the data center for some of that is horrendous. Big data center, how about a small city's worth of power? You just look at the power lines coming into those data centers.
Well, I don't even know. I was going to ask you about metaverse and see what you thought about the metaverse.
Well, it ain't going to work when the power goes off. And if they don't, maybe they got enough power to run that off of solar panels, but you can't drink water from solar panels. So then where are you going to get food? That's not, it's.
Well, can't we have virtual?
I doubt it.
Well,
see, one of the things my kind of mind is really interested in, well, I'm going to say real stuff.
Well, it's interesting. What advice would you give parents about their own children, especially now that it seems, for a number of different reasons, some parents, they give their kids the technology, they let them stay on video.
Well, I think we're going to need to limit the amount of technology and get kids out doing real things. I was just reading a nice little book about parenting just the other day on autistic kids, and this child would love to watch football games on TV, and then one day they took him out to a real football game, the real thing, and the kid was going up a concession stand and buying stuff and getting out and doing things. I'm seeing too many autistic kids getting addicted to video games. And you know how you get them off? Mechanics. It's the one thing that's worked to get them off. And they find out that fixing motors is more interesting than video games. And we need people to be, fixing that stuff. We need all the different kinds of minds. We need the visual thinker like me, the mathematical mind, the verbal mind, and a lot of people are mixtures.
So me as a verbal person, there's room for
me? Absolutely, because absolutely.
I have some value.
Okay, my grandfather was a co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes, mathematical engineer from MIT. He worked with another guy who was autistic, who come up with this crazy visual idea for an autopilot that everybody thought was crazy. So they tinker in a loft for years. They get it to work. The invention was in every warplane during World War II, but the stolen version was in every warplane. They should have had a lawyer. You see, that's a verbal thinker. Yeah, you see, and a lot of startup companies, they call that hiring a suit. Basically, that's kind of a rude word for a verbal thinker, because you've got to run the company, like pay the payroll and order supplies and stuff like that.
I'm not going to take that as an insult.
No, but you've got to have, we need all the different kinds of thinkers. We need them. But unfortunately, my kind of thinker right now is just getting screened out. I've seen kid after kid after kid, like the third algebra class, they flunked it, and they can't become a veterinary technician. And they don't need algebra for a veterinary technician. They need old-fashioned arithmetic the way it was taught in the 50s up to 6th grade. That they do need.
Well, Temple,
I did.
What do you make of these, the Hollywood images? You know, that Hollywood tells its story through images. How do you see those images?
Well, right now I was thinking of a Jurassic Park movie. And one of the things I was thinking about, a lot of the computer stuff looks fake, and I noticed in the latest Jurassic Park movie that all the close-ups were done with puppets. So they were interacting with real things. Then I looked at the credits. You see how much was computer-generated credits and how much was puppets.
Wow.
And when they just did it, all computer animated. But if I watched the movie really carefully, all the close-ups of dinosaur heads were puppets. And that makes it look real.
Wow. So it's what your teacher was teaching you in a way.
And I was just watched the Empire Strikes Back just the other day. And the scenes inside the spaceships were on a set. They looked more real. Now the scenes of flying out of space look more fake. That's where the computer stuff really shines. But the scenes like inside the spaceships, since they were real sets, looked more real.
Did you ever see a movie with anyone who reminded you of you?
Oh, I don't know. That's almost too abstract a question to pull up the right images from my database.
Am I getting existential?
But they basically, existential. I remember reading some weird theory on language, and they talked about uniframes. And I could just see these things they use in the car factory to put the cars on as they go down the assembly line. And I know that's wrong.
Well, it's interesting. I bet you that Hollywood they do not want as many visual thinkers as you, because you basically see what's wrong with the visual images.
But there's a lot of visual thinkers in Hollywood making visual images. I mean, the fact that they went back to puppet heads.
Well, I'm talking about the audience. I'm not talking about the makers.
But there's a lot of visual thinkers. I know a lot of photographers, and that can't do algebra. They're really terrible in math, and they went into photography. And they are my kind of mind. And I've talked to them, and they loved them, their new camera gadgets and stuff like that. And that's I never passed an algebra class.
Should we make them do algebra?
No. They need business math so they can run their business.
So are you trying to say you need to liberate some of these kids?
Algebra, if you're going to do chemistry, if you're going to do quantum computing, you will need algebra. You need linear algebra. I can find the papers online. I don't understand them, but I could find them online and give them to the kid that can understand them.
So what about, it's interesting because a lot of colleges, like the UC colleges, the University of California, they require all of the kids to have taken Algebra 2 Trig, and it's really interesting.
I think it's stupid, and they've got the electric towers falling apart here.
Well, it's interesting because I will tell you, I have seen, because some of our kids, they're so mathematically gifted, they can do pre-calculus or calculus.
Well, then you just give them all the math, and they go into the mathematical fields. Programming, Bill Gates and I were exposed to the exact same computer, and he could do it, and I had to drop the class. But we were both exposed. Exact same thing, teletype terminal, tractor feed paper thing.
Well, it's interesting because I'm thinking about like the seniors because you have, you can have a 9th grader who's doing pre-calculus or calculus, and then you have a senior who has to fulfill that requirement of Algebra 2 Trig, and they are just dying.
They're going to die. And they're going to play video games in the basement when they need to be designing a water distribution system. No, I'm serious.
It seems like you have a gripe with California.
Well, I think California, I don't know, land of bureaucracy. Okay, I have this picture in my mind for the land of bureaucracy. I did some design work for Harris Ranch. And I went over to their plant, and I see this stupid pump that was on like a 10-foot open concrete slab. And they about had to have an act of Congress to move that pump. Any other state, we would have just moved it. Well, I see that pump on that stupid slab, and I'm going, you gotta be kidding.
So you want to go with me to these UC people and tell them that they need to drop this requirement?
Well, if you're going into skilled trades, you don't need that. And most of the people that I worked with that were building complicated equipment, they were all terrible at algebra. We've discussed it. Because you see, the thinking is completely pictorial. Nothing's abstract. And so they can look at a mechanical device and just figure out how to make it.
Well, one of the things that I have learned from you just in that moment, Temple, is that you're saying, like, it made me think that we don't really think about the kind of thinking that's required in each subject.
That's the problem.
And I think that's, and so could you go on and elaborate on that? Because I just now thought of that when you said that.
Well, you see, there's patterns. Like my idea of fun breakfast reading is science and nature. And I read these articles in there that, you know, quantum computing. And then I'll read some biology article or some material science article, beautiful geometric patterns of biological substances. Those need to be shown to the math kids. They'll just eat that stuff up. Beautiful geometric patterns in this.
And what about
some protein that's in your body, and it's a beautiful pattern. That needs to be shown to the math kids. But then you need me for the methods experiment. They just retracted, this is yesterday's reading, a major paper on making superconductivity. Remember the old Superman movie, squeeze a lump of coal and it becomes a diamond? Well, this is the thing that would squeeze a certain type of carbon and make superconductivity. They did a basic methods mistake. They did not write in the methods what type of carbon they used. Now that's the kind of methods mistake I would find. I read journal articles. The statistics, somebody else's job. I tear the methods section apart. So how about a methods section where cancer studies were ruined because the different labs used different types of mixing devices, and it wrecked the research. Little simple mixing devices, a little magnet that goes round and round, or a cute little Ferris wheel that just turns the test tubes like this, and I'm seeing those things now. And it changed the results of cancer research because they didn't write in the methods section exactly which mixing device they used. That's where you need me to be reviewing journal articles. Or they didn't tell me if you're doing a research with a mama rat on pup retrieval behavior, what kind of cage you housed her in and what bedding you put her on. It changes the results of the experiment. Man, I'm the methods police. Wow. And I couldn't believe it. On this experiment, I was reading this stuff, and they had a lot of complicated quantum theory, math stuff I didn't understand. But then I found one sentence in there. They didn't specify in the methods what type of carbon they used in this squashing device that squashed stuff.
Well,
That's very basic stuff.
I noticed,
and I'm seeing it. They had kind of a thing, looked like science fiction, pointy things like this, putting pressure on this material.
Well, I noticed that you said that, you know, because I'm seeing how you're saying that all of these types of thinkers are needed to work together.
We need it because you need the...
But I noticed that you didn't mention me, the verbal thinker.
Well, you need verbal thinkers to organize stuff.
You left me out.
Well, you see what happened with the book. Betsy, my co-author, is a total verbal thinker. So what we did with the book is I would write the rough drafts. Betsy would reorganize them and make them really nice. So that's a verbal thinker and a visual thinker working together and understanding our differences. But I learned a lot of things about Betsy to get her understand the practical world. I was trying to explain leverage to her on little third-grade kiddie science sites, and we had the same science site up, and we're talking on the phone. And she said, "Oh, I don't understand." I said, "No, okay, now. Okay, have you ever taken a screwdriver and pried the lid off a paint can?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "That's leverage. Like the tip moves about 1/4 of an inch and the handle moves several inches. That's leverage." Then she got it. But I had to relate it back to something real she'd actually done for her to understand leverage.
Well, it's really interesting to me because I think that for a lot of kids, what I see that happens in math, especially when they're young, is if they don't have that concrete reference, it doesn't make any sense. that exactly what you
Well,
were
you see in
saying.
the fractions, like cutting up a pizza, that's in fourths. I understand that. Or I can remember sharing and taking some juice and in 2 glasses and measuring, so we split it half and half.
Well, it's really interesting because one of the things that I know that we're talking about all the time is that I loved books and I loved reading when I was young, but I always used to picture everything in my mind as if it were a movie.
That's the way I am when I read books.
Right.
When I read description in books, I see it like a movie.
But we're finding is a lot of kids now do not see books that way. They don't see the pictures in the books, and then we sort of question, how deep the comprehension is, because they're not connecting to the language.
Well, I think a lot of kids aren't doing enough actual real stuff. Like I have another little book called Calling All Minds. It's to get kids doing things. I did a book signing for that book, and I have a very simple paper airplane in there. I found out that 20 to 30% of kids in suburban Denver had never made a paper airplane, had never cut out a paper snowflake. Then in the visual thinking book, I interviewed a doctor who was very frustrated trying to teach interns how to sew up cuts because they'd never used scissors in their life.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm talking about absolute basics here.
So what you're saying that, again, Temple, you gave me something that I'm thinking about deeply now, is this idea that the background knowledge that is necessary, that comes through experience, is not there.
That's right. And kids need to be doing things like making paper snowflakes. And I have a cute little picture I've put in some of my lectures where a little 3-year-old was being shown by his dad how water went through a drain that came off of our building. And it ran underneath a metal plate, and he had the kid taking the leaves out of it and running around to the other side and watching the water go through, and this 3-year-old thought that was the most fabulous thing there was, a drain off the roof in our building, which just shows that you can do this with the most mundane things.
Well, it's interesting, in talking to you tonight, I almost feel like this book and this conversation that we're having, you're telling us to wake up. And what do you want us to wake up to?
Well, I'm really concerned about the skill loss thing. And the things, like I was just in Nebraska, and I went and visited a local feed yard, and they've got a job opening, the highest paid job in the feedlot, that just maintain their vehicles, their feed trucks, and their feed mill. They can't fill the position. This is in the middle of Nebraska. And then you get out on the coast. I got a client right now that has absolutely no in-house skills. I have to be vague about this because I can't identify the client, because this is right. I can't identify something I'm going to criticize. But I want some very simple hydraulic stuff built that 20 years ago we would have just gone down in the shop, scribble it on a piece of paper, they would have just built it. They have no in-house capability to build the simplest little hydraulic thing, and they can't find a shop to build it for them. That's now.
What does that mean in terms of trying to bring back a manufacturing base to America?
They're going to be needing some of my kind of mind to make these chip factories they're building work.
So
and the other thing, right now, there's a lot of concern about other countries ripping our stuff off. Let me tell you something I learned from the meat industry, and it's true for any industry. You get too secretive, the secret is you're obsolete. I'm saying that seriously. There's only one way to stay ahead. You stay ahead. And there's a few crown jewels you protect. Most of the other stuff isn't worth protecting. You got to just stay ahead. And we're going to need all the different kinds of minds to do it. And the kids that can't do algebra are going to need to be in there to build better chip-making machines.
So what you're telling me on some levels, we're wasting talent.
We're wasting talent. It is that simple. That kid's playing video games in the basement when maybe he ought to be designing chip-making equipment. It's a lot more important than video games.
You hear that, parents?
No, we got to get them off of some of this, off of the devices, because we're losing skills. Art and mechanics, they go together. Then animals and photography. Those 3 things go together with my kind of thinker.
Tell me. Why?
Well, animals don't think in words. And and there's a whole chapter in visual thinking about animal consciousness. And I think I can't believe people would think a dog is not conscious. To me, that's just ridiculous. But I guess if you were an extreme verbal thinker, you'd have a hard time imagining how a dog could think just in sensory.
I think that's
a dog
abstract
lives
thought.
in a sensory-based world.
I think I caught you with abstract thought.
Okay? Well, sensory, I'm seeing, okay, things he's feeling, things he's smelling, things he's seeing. And also another interesting experience that Betsy had is, you know, for many years she never had a dog. And then when she got a dog, I said, now watch what it does. And she says, I love to like let it loose in the field and just watch what it does. That's sort of like the screwdriver and the paint can lid. She's now becoming really aware of what a dog does. And it's not a verbal-based word. It's smelling everything. She doesn't yank her dog away from the tree. She lets him smell it.
Well, the thing is, it's really interesting to me. The other thing is, again, I go back to where I started with you, with the fascination for the animals, and you've devoted your life to really trying to make, you know, the welfare of animals, particularly livestock, better in the cattle industry. Why?
Well, they get scared. If you're rough and nasty cattle, they get scared. And they get, you yell at cattle. Cattle get scared because it has intent. They know you're mad at them. They know that has intent. I've done a lot of work to improve how cattle are treated. And I know cattle and other ruminants are getting blamed for methane. You know, leaking oil field equipment is the same. Swamps are worse. But actually, if you use ruminant animals correctly, you can improve land with them. 20% of the world's habitable land can only be used for grazing. You cannot crop it. There's not enough groundwater and there's not enough rain. You can graze it. And you do it right, you can improve the land. You do grazing wrong, it wrecks land. But it improves land if you do it right.
Well, it's really interesting because one of the things I learned about you that I think the world needs more of is you use your talent to fix things.
I want to fix things. And the other thing is a lot of verbal thinkers that say, well, we got to have an exclusive classroom, but how do you do it? I worked on something specific, cattle handling. That's not, I was just talking to a young student on the phone the other day. She says, well, I just want to treat animals more humanely. I said, I picked out something a lot more targeted. I could see cattle handling. That's not everything with animals. That's something I could actually work on and fix, both with equipment and with managing and training the people.
Well, what do you think it would do for children to realize that there are things they can fix, and they can fix them doing stuff like you did?
Well, that we need to have them doing a lot more things. We got kids growing up today that have never used a tool. Now I'm seeing a computer monitor that I knew how to fix. I didn't replace the power supply on it, even though I knew how. I was just too busy. I should have given that computer monitor some high school students, say, take it over, we got to see if you can buy a new power supply online, and that monitor could have been fixed. I knew exactly what was wrong with the monitor, and I could have fixed it, but I didn't. It's busy. I was nonstop travel.
Well, it's
I
interesting.
kept it for 2 years, and then it finally got thrown out. But let's say I was in a situation where I had to fix it, I could have. I knew exactly what was wrong with it, and I know how to solder.
Well, it's interesting. Temple, did you ever think that you would, when you were young, that you would have the life that you have now?
Well, I kind of vaguely wanted to be a scientist. My favorite book in 4th grade was about inventors. And, and these were mechanical devices, cotton gin, grain harvesting equipment, steamships, trains. So the kind of things that were the inventions where the patent office first started. What I call the clever engineering department. And Betsy sent me this really cool text, and she went and visited a museum in New York, and of course she's a publisher and a writer, and got face-to-face with the original linotype machine that makes movable type. Yeah, that's clever engineering. She stood in front of that linotype machine, and I could maybe get the phone out and I could maybe find her text here she wrote about it. It was just so cool. Yeah, she said, saw a real live linotype at a museum today. Almost had a heart attack to see the real thing. A clever engineer was here. That's a text from Betsy. And she took a picture of the linotype machine.
Wow.
That's pure clever engineering. Probably had almost no algebra in it.
You really have a thing for this algebra.
I don't think I could graduate from high school today. And, I mean, serious. And I'm wondering, what would I do if I was a low-income student and I couldn't graduate from high school today? And let's say someone waved a magic wand. I'm in California today. I've already flunked like 2 algebra classes.
You're not going to a UC.
But but there's a back door in the industry. I saw a lot of people go into the meat industry and get a job in the maintenance department, and then 15 years later, they were in charge of building a new plant addition. High school education, in charge of a new plant addition. Been there, seen that. So let's say I still had my knowledge, but I have now. I'm going to head straight for factory, and I want to build the next one. And I know how big corporations work, and I know how to do that. That's what I would do, back door. There's lots of back doors into jobs. You can start out entry level, work your butt off, unloading trucks, whatever. Got to pay your dues.
Well, it's interesting. It's almost like an apprenticeship model of learning that you kind of...
That's what they do in Germany. That's what they do in Holland. That's why we're buying a poultry processing plant in 100 shipping containers. And that was right before COVID, I saw that. I stood on this catwalk and I looked at that nameplate from Holland, and I'm going, my animal welfare hat was rejoicing as it's a really wonderful system, and I'm going, we don't make it anymore.
I'm almost going to say something that I know there are lots of our parents that are at the house, and this is a college prep school, so I'm saying this, it's an interview. So I'm going to say that, do you think all children need to go to college?
There's one place where they don't, real high-end skilled trades. I'm not talking roofing, I'm not talking laying down asphalt, I'm talking about high-end skilled trades. That's the one place they don't, and that's my kind of mind. It's not for everybody. There's 2 parts of engineering. There's the clever engineering department, and there's the mathematical part of engineering, and we need both.
So do you think there's a place for everybody in our society to find something that they can do?
Well,
valuable?
Just gave a talk to United Airlines. I think they've done some good things, and they have some people that have some intellectual disabilities help passengers work the kiosks. And then I also talked about hiring mechanics. And basically what I told them, I said, ditch the regular interview process. You want the guy for a mechanic that's rebuild a car engine, bring you in like before and after pictures. That's the guy you want. Because what they do is I learned to sell my work. I sold jobs by showing off drawings and pictures. That's how I sold Cargill back in the late 80s. I learned to sell my work, but you're not going to do any good to show the pictures to the HR department. I got to show them to the engineering department or the plant manager, somebody that's going to care about it. And for some of these jobs, we've got to change the interview process. So United Airlines, they were really open to that. Some other company I talked to, which I will not mention, goes, no, we can't change that. So one company's actually doing something, and the other's paying lip service. So you've got different levels of jobs, but that mechanic that can fix the really gnarly, weird electrical problems in airplanes, probably be the one that can't do algebra. But then you're going to need the computer person to reprogram the computer. You see, you've got to have both. I just visited some beautiful dairies up in Quebec, and they fixed a whole bunch of stuff on a dairy robot. And the dairyman goes, yeah, and the equipment company copied all the stuff I did. I stop at the software. He was my kind of thinker. So you got to have the person, the mathematical person, to do the software, but you need my kind of mind to make the mechanics work.
Well, a lot of the youth today, they want to be social media influencers. So what about them?
Well, there's a few that make a lot of money doing that.
What kind of
but we need more. They're real ambitious, for one thing. But we need more people doing real things. I mean, I can't believe your power grid. Okay, we're going to go electric cars here, but you don't have enough electricity. I saw this goofy picture that showed a fancy electric car plugged into a high-speed charging station run by a diesel generator. So.
Well, what about
do something about your power supply?
So, are you optimistic about the fact that so many of our young people want to be social media influencers?
Well, there's a few that get very successful. And the other problem we've got with social media is if you set the algorithm for maximum money ad revenue, clicks on ads, maximum engagement with the site, it accentuates stuff that's too controversial to talk about that's really bad. Let's just leave it that way. You see, the reason why they don't moderate some of this stuff is because they'll make less money. You just set the pure mathematics to make money, it accentuates a lot of bad stuff.
So if I'm understanding...
We'll leave it at that because I have a no politics policy.
So if I'm understanding you right, so if the social media and the technology is
We need to be doing more real stuff.
It's capturing the attention of the kids, and you're saying that attention needs to be focused
We need to be focusing attention on solving real problems. See, one of the problems with verbal thinking is they say very, very abstract
You
things.
just keep telling me the problems with my type of thinking.
But
all night, you're telling me the problems.
But we also need your kind of thinking for organization, for making great literature. You know, but let's say my kind of thinking gets interested in food production, you know, basic things.
Things that we really need.
Yeah, like water,
and
electricity.
We can get by without algebra and literature.
Well, but you need algebra if you want to do for computing. You need algebra for chemistry.
What about the literature?
Well, that enriches life. We need all the different kinds of minds, but the thing that's really bad is my kind of thinker is being screened out.
Yeah.
Absolutely being screened out. And you need us because the infrastructure is falling apart. And we want to become the leaders of chip manufacture. You're going to need my kind of mind to make those chip making plants work.
Is it too late for us to catch up?
No, it's not too late to catch up, but we're going to have to, change some things.
What?
And the thing you got to learn is only one way to stay ahead in technology. You stay ahead. You get too worried about protecting your old stuff, you'll find that's obsolete because you don't communicate with anybody, so you don't know how obsolete you've gotten. And this makes me think of this dumpy old plant that I went to 25 years ago to work on some beef handling equipment, and I had signed like 3 NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and I had to give back the as-built drawings, which I never had to do any other job. Nobody in their right mind would have copied the stuff in that dump.
They were protecting their
They're
property.
protecting rubbish. But the problem is that they didn't communicate enough with the outside world to realize that their stuff was rubbish.
So they didn't
and
know
it was
they were
obsolete.
behind? So you're saying they didn't know they were behind?
They didn't know they were behind. That's the problem. They didn't know they were behind.
Did you know they were behind?
Yes, because I'd been to a whole lot of other plants that were super nice. That's how I knew they were behind.
Did you tell them they were behind?
Oh, I tried to be diplomatic, so I just... But they were protecting rubbish. I mean, one time, something here, we got all upset about some stupid 25-year-old cargo plane drawings that somebody copied. That's the kind of stuff you have to worry about. There's stuff in development. I call it certain things are the crown jewels. Stuff that's under development, you have to protect it. Once something's out in a jillion factories, you can't protect it. You got to stay ahead by staying ahead, and we're going to need all the kinds of minds to do that.
What do you want to fix now?
I'd like to just get people back to, let's work on real stuff. Let's figure out we need to actually fix some water systems. Working on we have people making policy now where if they're totally removed from the practical, you make policy that you can't implement. You see, that's the problem. See, my kind of mind, okay, I made some big differences in animal welfare, but I was picking out relatively targeted things, cattle handling, developing an auditing system for measuring welfare in a slaughterhouse, using some very simple measurements that worked. But that's not the whole world. See, you're picking out something you can actually work on. I have students say, well, I want to work in social justice. That's too abstract. Well, how about something more targeted, using DNA evidence to prove that this person who's in prison didn't do the crime? Okay, that'd be an example of doing something targeted that you actually could do for social justice, rather than just sort of screaming about it in the abstract.
Well,
my mind has to think in specific examples.
Well, it's interesting. One of the ideas that keeps circling back here that actually I think is something for us all to think about, which I'm hearing, is you keep saying in some ways, in different ways, that we have lost touch with reality and that we're not experiencing the world through our senses, like our basic way of knowing the world. And there are consequences for that in everything.
Yeah, and I'm seeing when we have just more problems, water systems that are not working. I stayed at this hotel in Pittsburgh. You see, I think in specific examples, well, the pipes blasted in the city. Brown crap was coming out of the faucets in this hotel, and we almost had to rent porta potties for a 600-person convention. We came that close to having to rent porta potties. And I stayed in that hotel, and Brown came out, and they gave us bottled water because they hadn't maintained the piping system in the city.
Wow, it's interesting because am I understanding you right that in your estimation, the nation's infrastructure is crumbling and we are not going to have people that can actually fix it?
Well, that's right, because they're playing video games in the basement and the shop classes were taken out. That's the problem. We got kids growing up today that have never used a ruler, that don't know you have to change oil in cars.
So we don't know, so we're losing our ability to live.
I'm worried about it, and we need, but I want to make, need all the, we need the mathematicians too, but what's happening is we're screening out people that are going to, that we need to keep things going.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that you've made me really think about is how we're wasting human potential.
Oh, we're wasting talent. Because some of the most fun stuff I ever did was sitting around with the guys in the shop and trying to figure out how to build stuff. We also used to like to talk about how stupid we thought the suits is. But the thing is that what I'm realizing now, at the time that we were doing that kind of talk in the job trailer, I didn't know what I know now about different kinds of thinking. And in the visual thinking book, there's a whole chapter on the science behind the object visualizer and the visual spatial to show that these different kinds of thinking exist. Because we certainly need the verbal thinkers in business to keep things organized.
And if you want this crowd to remember one thing from tonight, what is it?
Well, somebody asked me on an interview just the other day if I was Secretary of Education, what would I do? I'd put all the hands-on classes back in the schools. That's basically what I would do. That's simple.
Simple. This has been extraordinary, and you truly are a hero, and you truly are, someone that I hope people will listen to. I know I listen to you, and I hope that we can change the society in order to save
And
ourselves.
I want to emphasize, just like I did in my 2010 TED Talk, the world needs all kinds of minds. We need all the different kinds of thinkers. But the first step, and I've told this to all the big corporations, is you have to be aware that different minds exist. I didn't know until I was in my late 30s that verbal thinking existed.
Well,
I'm serious, I didn't know.
This book is the key, so now we all can know all the hidden gifts of all kinds of thinkers.
That's
Thank
right.
you, Temple.
Thank you.
So calculus is basically out.
Well, if you want to go into chemistry or orbital mechanics, you're going to need calculus to calculate the orbits. I said on the Mars rover, the mathematicians get it there, but somebody on a workbench built the beautiful cameras. So you need both kinds of minds.
Temple, thank you very much. In the book, in the brief introduction, you mentioned there are two types of visual thinkers. It was a game-changing moment.
Well, basically, the two types are object visualizer that thinks in pictures like me, and the visual spatial who thinks in patterns. That's the mathematician, which is a form of visual thinking. But one form is photographic pictures, the other is patterns. And that's where the mathematics comes in. And then, of course, you've got the verbal thinkers. But I'm seeing smart little math kids getting frustrated because the verbal thinkers want them to do math the verbal way. That's not how they do math. And little math kids that are doing baby math over and over again when they need to be doing high school math or college math.
Temple, do you have any type of synesthesia? Because
No,
I also
no.
have autism, and I think music in colors.
Well, and some people have synesthesia. You might want to read Daniel Tammet's book, Born on a Blue Day, and he uses synesthesia in some of his mathematics. I do not have synesthesia. My memory simply works well when I'm designing cattle facilities. I'm pulling up gates, concrete forming systems. Now I'm seeing some airport construction stuff and some construction out at the LA airport right now. They're horrid place for the Ubers and the lifts to load because they're under construction. Okay, now you see how that's associative?
Yes.
But it's associative in a way that makes sense.
Well, I'm noticing all your associations around LA.
That's right.
Do you know what I'm saying? In California.
Well, I don't know, we walked like half the length of the airport before we realized we had to wait at this green column to get the shuttle.
California needs to be fixed.
I'm curious, Temple, what you might think, since you have such a pragmatic mind, what your thoughts are about death. And since you deal with cattle handling with the idea that they will then be killed, can you share any of that
We have
with
to
us?
give those animals a really good life while they're alive. And there's nothing nice about how hyenas tear living guts out of animals and eat them while they're still alive. Nature can be very, very harsh, and we've got to give those animals a decent life. And that I feel strongly about. A life worth living is what the term that's often used.
Yeah, you look to me, the verbal person, for that.
Temple.
I guess I have some value.
Yeah, there's things that, people ask me about, difference between people and animals. The main difference isn't the emotions, it's the giant computer we have sitting up on top that enables language. But the other thing that blows my mind is just how illogical humans can be.
Temple.
Yep.
Hi. I'm wondering, so how do you help nonverbal thinkers improve their socialization skills?
Okay, you mean nonverbal people with autism that don't talk?
Or people who think in pictures, or maybe are very mathematically oriented.
Well, they just have to
or
learn what I call business social, and this was taught in the 50s. Shake hands, greet people, be polite.
The manners.
Manners. Now, there is I don't do bar scene social. There's a kind of chit-chat social that people do where they're liking a rhythm and having such a great time. My processor speed's too slow to follow that.
Mm-hmm.
If I was a computer, I've got a real slow processor speed, like a phone on one bar trying to download a web page. But I've got lots and lots and lots of memory.
Lots of RAM.
I've got tons of memory, but a slow processor. Maybe I'm an Intel 286. So.
Hi, Temple. What is your favorite tool and why?
What's my what?
Your favorite tool to use and why?
Favorite tool. Okay, that's when I was in 5th grade, I had a wonderful little coping saw where you could cut out intricate shapes in wood. I really enjoyed using that. That was one of my very first shop projects that's in Calling All Minds. I liked the fact that I could cut the wood out into intricate shapes with that.
Wow.
Hi, Temple. You said that you didn't realize that other kinds of thinking existed until your 30s. What made you realize that you are a different thinker than most?
Well, I got kind of talking to people about how they think, and if I ask you something like house or car, most people can visualize that. Mm-hmm. But then I discovered if I ask about something a person doesn't own, like think about a church steeple, how does it come into your mind? I was shocked when a speech therapist, this was in my late 30s, saw 2 lines, pointy thing, just 2 lines like that. No other visualization. I'm going, you've got to be kidding. That was my first inkling that people thought differently. And then I started, then I originally thought that all autistic people thought in pictures, and that turns out to be wrong. Autistic people come basically in mathematical picture thinking like me and word thinkers. Then I started questioning people, and I discovered some Clara Claiborne Clark's writing about Jesse, and I was looking at that and patterns. And then I got the idea there's patterns, and then when I was doing the previous book, The Autistic Brain, I was surfing around online in the middle of the night, and I found the reference to the papers that showed the mathematical thinking, the object visualizers were different. And that's when I discovered the magic keyword, object visualizer. You don't have that keyword, you won't find the papers online. And research had been done on that. And that was like a big eureka moment. I said, oh boy, the research got done on that. But the first step is realizing that you think differently. And a lot of people are kind of combinations, but one of the kind of thinking usually predominates.
Hi, good evening. I agree with what you're saying, especially about the electives and the classes. I'm a special ed teacher, and I also have a son who has autism, and he's 16. And it's a joke about transitioning to work. And they're not offering the hands-on, even into school, and for the district to believe
I don't know.
that
You're
these
going to
are
have to
important.
just do it yourself. I think that while these fully verbal autistic kids need to have 2 real jobs before they graduate from high school. And I'd avoid super multitasking jobs like a takeout window that's crazy busy. I'd avoid that. But they need to learn to work, because the granddads that discovered they're autistic had paper routes as kids, and I know that's gone. But how about volunteer job at a farmer's market when they're 11, just to help out? They've got to learn how to do tasks outside the home on a schedule. Walk somebody else's dog. It's very important. It's somebody else's dog.
So we need to advocate, and we need to do it. If the schools
You're
aren't
gonna have
doing
to
it,
just
we need to
do
do
it.
it.
And I'm seeing, I'm shocked at the amount of 12-year-olds and teenagers that I talk to that have never gone in a store and just bought something by themselves. This is ridiculous.
So Moorpark College here has a makerspace, and it was the first time that I had seen a makerspace at a university.
Good.
And I've done 50 different universities that I've worked with. I'm wondering if you know of any grant funding that colleges or schools can apply for to help create spaces like that.
I
That
think you
otherwise,
just got to go to local businesses. Guess who has a makerspace? The physics lab at Harvard. I was just there, and they had all kinds of 3D printers, but they also had crocheting in a room marked physics lab, and sewing machines, and they're realizing they need to get their students doing hands-on things. And I really was shocked to see crocheting in the Harvard physics lab. And that was one of my stops on the book tour. Well, thank you all for coming.